The Book Whisperer, Chapter 4, Reading Freedom. In Chapter 4 of The Book Whisperer, Donalyn Miller walks us through some of the techniques she uses to turn her 6th grade students into enthusiastic readers. She starts out by sharing her own personal philosophy of reading. The foundation of her approach is to give students a large degree of freedom in choosing their own reading material. This leads to more time spent reading, which in turn leads to improved comprehension and better test scores. Miller cites the rights of the reader, as articulated by the French author Danielle Pennac, as an eloquent summation of her beliefs. Number 1, the right not to read. Number 2, the right to skip pages. Number 3, the right not to finish. Number 4, the right to reread. Number 5, the right to read anything. Number 6, the right to escapism. Number 7, the right to read anywhere. Number 8, the right to browse. Number 9, the right to read out loud. And number 10, the right not to defend your tastes. As we'll see, these rights come up time and again throughout the chapter. Miller begins each school year by having a series of open, honest conversations with her students about the reading habits of real people. She freely admits to taking advantage of several rights of the reader that seem like cheating. For example, she will sometimes reread a book, choose a book to read based on its length, or abandon a book that she finds boring. By being honest, she gives her students permission to be honest about their own reading habits, and also lays the groundwork for students to trust her as a fellow reader who wants to guide them to books they will enjoy. Miller says that when students enter her class, most are not used to planning their own future reading. Therefore, she provides a blueprint by requiring that each student read 40 books by the end of the school year. The 40 books are then broken down by genre. The number of books per genre may change from year to year, and the genres themselves may be modified, if need be. Here we see a sample breakdown from one year's class. After announcing the 40-book requirement, Miller deflects any attempts to negotiate or to discuss the consequences of failing to read 40 books. While the vast majority of her students are able to meet that benchmark, her ultimate goal for the students is not to have them reach some arbitrary number of books read, but to have them find enjoyment in reading so that they will continue to read regularly throughout their later lives. Some students, whom Miller refers to as underground readers, may be so deeply immersed in one genre, such as fantasy, that they don't meet the goals for other genres. However, as long as they are reading material that expands their knowledge base and vocabulary, which will be reflected in their test scores, she is not inclined to force them to read other genres. One cornerstone of Miller's teaching is to remain positive and encouraging. This starts with meeting students where they are, that is, not being judgmental about their past reading experiences or their present attitudes towards reading. As examples, she relates the stories of two of her students, Madison and Brandon. Madison was not an enthusiastic reader when she entered 6th grade, but she became motivated by being in an environment in which social interactions around reading were encouraged. Although she didn't reach the goal of 40 books, she still found herself reading more in Mrs. Miller's class than she ever had before. Similarly, at the beginning of the school year, Brandon declared that he hated to read and was not a good reader. He looked at reading as something that teachers told him to do, not as something he would ever choose to do on his own. Brandon spent nearly a month laboring through a book that was ill-suited to him before finally taking Mrs. Miller's suggestion to try the novel Hatchet by Gary Paulson. He wound up falling in love with the book and reading the entire 5-book series. For all of her students, but especially those like Madison and Brandon, who enter her class as virtual non-readers, Miller strives to be a source of encouragement, celebrating progress and not focusing on any failure to meet requirements. Another example of Miller's emphasis on positivity is her commitment to validating the reading choices made by her students. Some educators take issue with this aspect of reading freedom, since kids sometimes choose to read works of questionable merit. However, if the goal is to create avid readers, it's not in a teacher's best interest to denigrate any books that students actually enjoy. Referring back to the rights of the reader, two of those rights are particularly relevant here: the right to read anything and the right not to have one's tastes judged. In this regard, Miller relates the story of Mary, a student who claimed that the only book she had ever enjoyed reading was The Day My Butt Went Psycho by Andy Griffiths. Instead of criticizing Mary's taste in books, Miller read the book herself to better understand what Mary liked about it. Miller found the book to be as crude and outrageous as the title would suggest, but because she took the time to read it, she gained Mary's trust, and she was eventually able to recommend some more sophisticated books that Mary had actually enjoyed reading. By the same token, Miller believes that adolescent boys should be allowed to read edgy, controversial books aimed at their age group, such as The Chocolate War. From her perspective, any choice of reading material is better than a choice not to read at all. In a discussion of her classroom teaching methods, Miller describes how she uses read-alouds for a number of different purposes. To help establish a bond with her students, the first book she reads aloud each year is Tripping Over the Lunch Lady, an anthology of short stories that addresses the concerns of middle school kids. During the school year, she uses read-alouds to introduce about 15 popular authors whose bodies of work might be of interest to her class. For example, she reads to her students from Gary Paulson's memoirs as a way to familiarize them with the author and build their interest in reading his novels. As a side benefit, this is exposing her sixth graders to autobiographical writing, a genre that may be new to them. Speaking of genre, the formal categorization of books, Miller calls it the organizing principle of her classroom. Once you have an understanding of genre, you have access to the common language of readers. In other words, you have the ability to talk to other people about books. In a series of discussions early in the school year, Miller and her students develop lists of characteristics for different genres. They start with fictional genres before moving on to nonfiction and poetry. For example, if a book has wizards or magic users, its genre must be fantasy. However, not all fantasy books have wizards or magic users. Some may have talking animals or mythical creatures instead. During these discussions, Miller encourages her students to draw on all their knowledge of stories, not just from books, but from movies and TV shows as well. Again, by doing so, she is validating her students' lived experiences and meeting them where they are. She is also gaining valuable insight into their background knowledge and their prior reading histories. After several weeks of studying genre, Miller's students put their knowledge to work in a genre identification activity. In her classroom, the desks are arranged in groups. Each group of desks gets a tub full of books from one genre. It's the student's job to figure out what that genre is based on the teaser information on the book's back covers. As an example of the kind of learning that takes place during this activity, Miller recounts a conversation that one group of students had regarding the book Foster's War by Carolyn Reeder. The book is set against the real events of World War II, and the students were in disagreement as to whether it should be considered historical fiction or informational. Ultimately, they determined that the protagonist was a fictional character, which made the book historical fiction. As they complete the tub activity, Miller students are simultaneously getting a chance to preview books that they may eventually want to read, and to become more familiar with the class library, which is organized by genre. The time Miller spends on building genre knowledge helps her students to choose books they'll enjoy. It also helps them to make accurate predictions while reading. In addition, the less active readers in the class may get a better sense of the kinds of books that are available to them. One final component of Miller's approach to teaching reading is regular communication between student and teacher. This takes place in writing through the reader's notebook and face-to-face through student conferences. Each student in the class maintains a reader's notebook, a spiral notebook, with separate sections for tallying progress toward the genre requirements, recording titles of books read or attempted, listing books for future reading, and response entries. Response entries are weekly letters to the teacher with students' personal responses to what they are currently reading. The tone is friendly and conversational. The teacher then responds with her own letter, resulting in an ongoing dialogue between a more experienced reader and a less experienced reader. Miller also maintains her own notebook, similar to the reader's notebook, except that instead of response entries, she has notes from student conferences. Miller ends Chapter 4 with some examples of response entries and her replies, and of the conversations that take place during student conferences. She uses each conference to survey the student's progress, as reflected in the first few sections of the reader's notebook, to ask questions, and to give encouragement. Providing this feedback is one final way in which she models authentic behavior and builds personal connections with her students. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for watching.